afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to this event on women human rights defenders paving pathways to justice, supporting efforts towards accountability and peace. I think this conversation, we often say this conversation is needed even more today, urgently today, but I think we're all at a moment where we recognize that this conversation is urgently needed and that these conversations must lead to action. Over the past few days, I have been doom scrolling just to distract myself because every time I open my phone, I think, what next? So instead of doom scrolling, I decided to read. And I started to read Audre Lorde's Sister Outsider. And she was speaking about the importance of moving from silence to talk to action. And that is what the human rights defenders in the room today do. My name is Tawny Broadber. I am lucky to be the head of the Secretariat for the Women, Human Peace and Humanitarian Fund. I'm sorry, I just got off a plane, a 9-hour ride. I know where I work. It is an exciting moment to be at the helm of this particular fund because of the support that we're able to give to women human rights defenders. And I've worked for the UN for a long time. And this has been one of the most impactful jobs that I've been able to have because I have met the women in Ukraine, where I was in February, in Afghanistan, where I have not been able to visit, but I've been able to meet the Afghan women fighting for human rights, wherever they are. Sudan, women who want to go home but cannot. And all of you who are doing whatever it is you can from your space to ensure human rights remain at the center of any development policy that exists in the world today. Housekeeping. I just want you to know that there are 2 bathrooms outside. Our very, very important people, all of you and partners, have reserved seats at the front of the room. And once the room has reached capacity, we will have to close the door, just for all of our safety. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. In my reading, I was rereading the Oxford Handbook on Women, Peace and Security. And one chapter is about states living the promise of women, peace and security. And that chapter was about Norway. Norway is the definition of what the Jamaicans, if you've heard my accent, you can tell I'm from that region, say little but talawa, small but powerful. The window that we have, the Women Human Rights Defender window, would not exist without the government of Norway. They were the first to invest in this window, and they have been demonstrating that small states are norm entrepreneurs. And since Resolution 1325 was established, Norway has consistently ensured not only that they speak truth to power by making a statement every year during Open Debate Week on Women, Peace and Security, but they invest in women, peace and security through human rights defenders. So it is my pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Sitzel Blekken, the Ambassador for Women's Rights and Gender Equality of Norway. Please join me in giving her a warm applause.
Thank you, Tony, for this very, nice introduction. Thank you for the invitation to be here. And as we already heard, because women, peace and security is one of Norway's major priorities when it comes to our foreign and development policy. It was our priority in the Security Council, and it's very much part of our development cooperation as well. And it's very closely linked to also our engagement for human rights defenders in general and for women human rights defenders in particular. So I'm very pleased to be here with this, this group and to be able to talk to you. And Norway, as you have said, has a long-standing partnership with the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. And our commitment and support is closely linked to a belief that women in all their diversity are key agents of peace, development, and humanitarian response. And our support focuses on flexible funding, which we recognize is becoming increasingly important in the current financing climate. And the funding is based on our appreciation of the work of the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund and its flexibility and ability to reach so many local women and organizations and networks. That's where, that's where the support, that's where the work is really taking place. That's you at the local level, at the grassroots, who bear the brunt and who are the first to act and is the most important actors, I think, in this. And we can be at sort of the UN level and we can be at national level making policies and having words on paper, but words on paper needs to be implemented. And that's you on the ground that do the implementation. And I think that's extremely important to remember. And now Norway's support to Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund is closely linked to our ongoing work on women rights defenders and promoting women's participation in peace and reconciliation processes. And we are particularly proud of the focus of today's meeting, as we were, as you said, part of establishing the window for human rights defenders. And it's with great sadness we witness the escalation of conflicts around the world and the growing disregard of international humanitarian law, increasing levels of conflict-related sexual violence, and lack of accountability. Protection of human rights defenders is a key priority in Norway's human rights efforts. Overall objective is for human rights defenders to be able to promote and defend human rights in all parts of the world, freely and safely, without encountering restrictions or threats to themselves or their families. And women human rights defenders face great risks in their work. Norway led in the negotiations that resulted in the adoption of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders in 1998 and has since been the main facilitator of the resolution on the human rights defenders that are proposed regularly in the Human Rights Council in Geneva, as well as the third committee here in New York. And the first ever resolution on women human rights defenders was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2013. So by adopting the resolution, UN member states confirm their duty to protect human rights and to protect human rights defenders. Fighting for human rights can be both difficult and dangerous. Under Norway's leadership, the UN has expressed grave concern about the increasing extent to which human rights defenders are threatened, stigmatized, intimidated, subject to reprisals and violence, and even killed, and about the failure to prosecute those responsible. Some human rights defenders are especially at risk, including people and organizations working to promote women's rights, to protect the rights of LGBT plus people, indigenous peoples, and those working to address human rights issues related to the environment, like land rights and exploitation of natural resources, and those working in conflict and post-conflict situations. We hope that this event here today will contribute to shed more light on women human rights defenders, their courage and achievements in the pursuit of justice and accountability. And I particularly look forward to hearing from you at the grassroots and your experiences and how we can work together and also understand better the challenges and the needs and how we can meet the needs on the ground. So I would also like to acknowledge the work of the NGO Working Group for your global advocacy work on behalf of civil society and for holding member states accountable. We need that. So ensuring the rights of women and girls and holding perpetrators accountable for their actions are essential for lasting peace. The local human rights defenders, civil society, the UN and member states need to work together. And we need to join forces to advocate for, prevent violations of women's and girls' rights and support survivors in their path for pursuing justice and accountability. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to see member states really demonstrating the support to the WPS agenda. And I'm pleased to share that there is another representative from a member state who has done just that. The government of France has been a very close friend to the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund for some time, even sitting on our board last year. We were very excited to have you join us on the WPHF Global Steering Committee. Last year, I was in Paris for the Feminist Foreign Policy Conference, and there again, we saw clear, substantive action around the importance of really gender mainstreaming across all aspects of foreign policy, specifically around women, peace, and security as well. Now, this Women Human Rights Defender window that WPHF leads would not be possible without the partnership of international NGOs. We have 2 international NGOs based in France that help us do the critical work of providing protection to women human rights defenders, as well as being able to provide them with the advocacy that they need to be able to speak on their own behalf, so that you can hear directly from women who are working at that local level. So I want to thank France, one, for being an open space for civil society to be able to work internationally to support women human rights defenders, and also for always showing up for gender equality and women's empowerment at the global level. So it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Balthazar Leonard, Chief Minister for Francophonie and International Partnerships of the Government of France, to give his opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tony. Honorable colleagues, dear all, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you first for this meeting, allowing us to gather at this timely and important moment. It is a privilege to speak on behalf of France as a proud member of the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund contributors. We reaffirm our strong commitment to its vital mission, supporting women's leadership in peace building and humanitarian action. Today's gathering is particularly meaningful as we celebrate the International Women's Day, Women's Rights Day, and the opening day of the CSW, taking place in the wake of the 15th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. While these anniversaries invite us to acknowledge progress achieved, it reminds us that these gains cannot be taken for granted. Yet this progress is under threat. We are witnessing a backlash, a slowing, stalling, and even reversing of the gains we have made. This challenge is unfolding across multiple arenas. On the ground, in the context of crisis and political tension, in the digital space, in multilateral negotiations where attempts to undermine gender equality are intensifying. France strongly condemns all violations of dignity and fundamental rights. Fighting impunity against gender-based violence must remain a collective priority. In this context, the role of women human rights defenders is more crucial than ever. Across the world, they work tirelessly, often at a great personal risk, to document violations, support survivors, advocate for justice, and hold perpetrators accountable. Their action spans what we can describe as a continuum of justice, from local documentation and survivor support to engagement with national and international accountability mechanisms. France firmly believes that women human rights defenders must be fully recognized as agents of change. Their leadership and their meaningful participation in decision-making progresses, including peace negotiation and justice mechanism, are critical in shaping a peaceful and inclusive future. Yet, their work too often exposes them to intimidation, threats, and violence. This is unacceptable. Every woman and girl has the right to live free from violence, discrimination, and oppression. Through its feminist foreign policy, adopted in 2019 and reaffirmed in a new strategy in 2025, France places gender equality and women's rights at the core of its diplomatic action. Women and girls cannot access justice without the basic right to make decisions about their own lives and their own bodies. We must ensure safe access to contraception, maternal care, and essential health service for all women and girls, including the right to safe abortion. We are particularly attentive to emerging challenges, including the intersection between climate change, security, and gender equality. Programs such as the WPHF's Women and Climate Security Program are key in recognizing the disproportionate impact of climate change on women and girls. We view the ecological transition as an opportunity to reduce these inequalities. As we move forward, we thank all participants for joining this important discussion. We must stand together to resist rollback and set up for progress in advancing gender equality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. The work of women human rights defenders, when a Hollywood movie takes it over, it's very smooth and all pat, but it's very, very difficult work, often work that threatens your economic stability, livelihood. But through partnerships with governments like Norway, France, and Belgium, who we will hear from later this afternoon, and also partnerships with UN agencies. There are UN agencies that work at the root of what WPHF does, because we are a partnership between member states, the government, and UN agencies. Now, of course, UN Women, who host the Secretariat of WPHF and with whom we are extremely proud. I see Paving Canisto in the room, the Chief of UN Women's Peace and Security Division. And we also work with UNHCR, who sits as the chair of our board and who will also give remarks later today, as well as UNFPA, IOM, and UNDP. A really wonderful organization that has been working with us to ensure that the recovery work, the economic livelihood work of women human rights defenders and beyond are maintained in spite of conflict and crises. And specifically, UNDP has been doing excellent work as well with environmental women human rights defenders. So it is my pleasure to introduce Evelyn Banaba, the chief of the country oversight team at UNDP, to share her opening remarks. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you, Tony-Ann.
Sorry.
Forgive me for my voice. It's a little bit, yeah. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and the remarkable women human rights defenders joining us today. On behalf of UNDP Regional Bureau for Africa, and on behalf of our ASG, Ahuna Isiakono, who was not able to join you today, I am honored to be here to join this important discussion. Allow me to begin by expressing sincere appreciation to our co-host, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, Belgium, Norway, WHRDs, UN Women, and Mina's List, for convening this timely dialogue at a moment when the protection of women human rights defenders is more urgent than ever. Across the world, we are witnessing profound and intersecting transformations. Economic, political, environmental, and social technology disruptions are increasingly compounding one another. These dynamics are eroding trust in institutions, shrinking civic space, and in some contexts, contributing to democratic backsliding. In this evolving landscape, women and girls, particularly those leading climate and environmental action, face systematic barriers and heightened risks, including harassment, intimidation, and gender-based violence. These threats unfold in a global context where women we still hold only about 2/3 of the rights afforded to men. Yet, despite these challenges, women human rights defenders continue to stand at the forefront of efforts to advance justice, accountability, and community resilience. Women environmental human rights and human rights defenders and women-led civil society organizations are indispensable actors in advancing climate justice, protecting ecosystems, and safeguarding the rights of communities. They are often on the front lines of struggles of land rights, natural resource or governance, deforestation, and conflicts intensified by climate change. And yet, their leadership frequently comes at great personal cost. Many face gender-based violence, digital harassment, disinformation campaigns, stigmatization, and exclusion from decision-making spaces. Recognizing both the critical role and the risk faced by women defenders, UNDP continues to work closely with women's organizations and movements worldwide. In 2025 alone, more than 100 UNDP country offices around the world partnered with women's groups to advance women's rights, address violence against women, strengthen movements, and support women defenders and climate advocates. One important example is UNDP's global initiative on strengthening women's civil society and women's environmental human rights defenders' influence for a just and green future. Through this program across countries such as Uganda, Indonesia, the Philippines, Kenya, and Iraq, we are supporting women environmental defenders and women-led organizations to strengthen protection networks, build evidence, and engage more effectively with national institutions. Our monitoring efforts are also revealing important patterns. Using UNDP's eMonitor Plus tool, more than 1,500 incidents of technology-facilitated violence targeting women defenders were flagged in just 1 month across Indonesia, Iraq, Kenya, the Philippines, and Uganda. These cases highlight how online harassment, sexualized attacks, demonization, and stereotyping are increasingly weaponized and against women defending environmental and climate rights. At the country level, we are also seeing encouraging progress. In Kenya, for example, UNDP works with partners such as the Women Environmental Defenders Arm, and we are honored to have today Diane Letion with us today to strengthen gender-responsive legal analysis in environmental justice. In Uganda, local organizations such as the Mount Elgon Environmental Human Rights Defenders Association and the Wenale Community Environmental Defenders Forum are advancing gender-responsive conservation commitments. In Indonesia, partners are supporting efforts toward a ministerial decree on the protection of human rights defenders. And in Iraq, women defenders supported by UNDP have contributed to establishing a Women's Advisory Council and the Iraqi Women for Sustainable Environmental Alliance. At the regional level, feminist perspectives from Africa have also influenced global climate negotiations. Contributions from African advocates helped secure with the UNFCCC Gender Action Plan discussions stronger recognition of the need for safety, protection mechanisms, and support system for women environmental defenders. These examples, ladies and gentlemen, remind us of an essential truth. The safety of women defenders is inseparable from the broader pursuit of rule of law, democratic governance, climate justice, and sustainable peace. Today's conversation offers an opportunity not only to learn from the extraordinary defenders joining us from Afghanistan, from Kenya, Sudan, and beyond, but also to renew our collective commitment, a commitment to strengthen protection mechanism, to amplify the leadership of women defenders, and to ensure that the international community of which we are all a part of stands firmly with them. At UNDP, we remain deeply committed to supporting and standing alongside women human rights defenders everywhere. I thank you.
Thank you so much. So when I left Geneva this morning, I had to take my 2 sons to school. I have a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old, and both are always asking, why do you need to go? And what is a woman human rights defender? And can't somebody else do it? Maybe, but I asked them to loan me to the world to be able to try and support this work. And that's what each and every woman who is a woman human rights defender is doing. She is taking time from her family, her care responsibilities, older parents, older siblings, to give to this world the promise of the UN Charter. So we can't do that without the INGOs, like Mina's List, who is a partner with us today, like Agir Ensemble pour les droits humains in France, in Lyon, who've been helping us, the Euro-Mediterranean Foundation for Human Rights Defenders, and of course, the INGO Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security. Not everybody understands the machinations of how change happens in the world. And while the grassroots change is the change that actually really transforms often, without it connecting to the rooms at the UN, the rooms in parliaments, we don't have sustained institutions and justice mechanisms to be able for that change to actually change lives. So when I was trying to answer my son, because how do you answer a 6-year-old, what is a woman human rights defender? I went to the UN definition, which is always a bit more robust than a 6-year-old can understand. But I did explain to him that it was any woman or girl who is working on a human rights issue. Actually, it goes beyond that. It's any human being working on a human rights issue. Even if they don't self-identify in the moment, they just find themselves like a few women who are shopkeepers in Ireland. They found, I'm going to stand for something. And they stood for a very long time against apartheid in South Africa. That led to Ireland becoming the first country to stand formally against apartheid in South Africa. We have with us today 3 women human rights defenders who are not enemies of states, as Sandra Louche, one of the women human rights defenders who we've supported from Syria, clearly stated. They're allies of people. It is through human rights defenders that the world witnesses what's happening on the front lines, whether it be oppression, conflict, and resilience. And those voices not only point out what's going wrong, they also tell us what we can do right. So that's what this conversation is. We need to remember what we're doing wrong. And we need to, in the memory of those who we have lost, Yana Mohammed included, what we must do right so that we do not see that happen again. So I would like to invite Ms. Nargis Nagan, Ms. Nimat Ahmadi, and Ms. Diana Letion to join me at the table. I made your name French. I don't know if it is pronounced that way, at the table so that we can have a conversation. And we really want to make sure that we open up so that you can also join the conversation. So I'll make sure to manage the time efficiently so that that is possible. Welcome again, ladies. It's wonderful to have you here with us. I'd like to invite each of you, rather than reading your resumes, I'd like to invite each of you to just give us, if you were to have to share with a 6-year-old who you are, how would you do so? I'm going to start with you, Diana.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana Letion, and if I were to introduce myself to a 6-year-old, I would say I am a lover of people. I am someone who cares for people. I am someone who sees people for who they are. And this seeing people for who they are is what makes me what I am today.
See what happens when we speak to 6-year-olds? What about you, Nargis?
Thank you very much. Although I'm single, but I have money. thank God, nieces and nephews. So I never explained to them, but one thing that they knew that whenever they are in trouble, in a school, with their parents or anywhere, wherever they see something is wrong, they have an aunt that they call, and she's going to be there for them.
Not only them, but we know you're there for the world.
Yes, thank you.
Nimat, what about you?
Thank you. Yeah, it is a difficult question to answer to 6-year-old, but I would say a troublemaker, but it's a good trouble. Because I used to shy about myself until I hear late Congressman John Lewis, the famous saying of good trouble, and then explain what good trouble means, that you do something, people think you are a troublemaker because you do things different, but for the good of the people, and you have to do it because it's not about yourself, it's about other people, but they need you to do it. Thanks.
Good trouble. Well, I may have gotten myself in a bit of good trouble as well because I sat down in Kavia's seat. Kavia, would you like to join us and tell us how you would introduce yourself to a 6-year-old while I stand for the rest of this, of this session?
Maybe I would just say troublemaker and leave it at that.
You know, I think it's interesting how we define trouble. And that's why John Lewis was so good, because when you are pushing back at unfair discriminatory norms, it may feel troublesome for some, but it is really freedom expressing itself most clearly. So my first question is about this theme for the Commission on the Status of Women that we're here for, and this entire event. Justice is often misunderstood as a verdict in a courtroom moment. But what does it really mean to you? What does your experience inform how does your experience inform your understanding of justice? And what does the full journey toward accountability look like for each and every one of you? Kavya, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I think verdicts and courtroom moments are important, of course, but not everyone has access to them. And sometimes that sort of justice can take a really long time, even decades to arrive. So it was only last October that the ICC issued its first conviction for atrocities in Darfur, which maybe Nimat might talk about, that took place in 2003. And just this January that the ICJ held hearings on the merits of the Gambia versus Myanmar case for the Rohingya genocide that took place in 2017. And perhaps as Nargis may touch on, the movement for codifying gender apartheid in the Afghanistan context and the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty is still many years away, though Afghan women need justice and accountability right now. So for me, justice is much more than those courtroom moments. It's also about dismantling the systematic barriers and structural inequalities that lead to justice in the first place, like patriarchy, like inequality. And it's not just about individual punishment. Most importantly, I think for me, the path to justice is really around accountability. Today, it's very clear to us that we're facing a crisis of accountability globally. The norms we've relied on, like the WPS agenda or Security Council resolutions or even international law, are being violated with impunity. The institutions we relied on to protect these norms, to uphold these norms, have been defunded or captured or ignored. And in this context, I think women human rights defenders become all the more essential. Human rights defenders and social movements are really engaged in the constant work of accountability, the day-to-day work of accountability, whether it's through documentation, whether it's through the media, whether it's through legal means. And given the rise of well-funded and well-organized anti-gender, far-right and authoritarian movements, the work of this women human rights defenders is all the more important and all the more essential, and they deserve as much political support and resources as we can give them.
Thank you so much for that. Nargis, what about you?
Thank you very much. Well, as you very well mentioned, accountability is a journey, and it's quite multi-layered. And it moves through different phases, the phases of denial, resistance, negotiation, and sometimes even regression. In reality, the courtroom verdicts arrive at a time that we have already laid the foundation for justice. And then that's the moment of courtroom comes. So the question is that, how do we lay the foundation for justice to be able to get to the courtroom or to get to like any platform that will do justice for us? That could be formal and that could be informal. So for that, the first step, which is the acknowledgement of the violation and equality, is very important. And this is the hardest one, because usually in the societies, the violations and as well as the injustice are either normalized or minimized, or they're being totally denied. So to be able to come forward and to call that as violation and injustice is very difficult, and you face a lot of difficulties, but you need to do that. And then of course, the second step comes, which is about documentation. So the documentation about truth seeking, and that is about collecting testimonies of the victims, documentation, doing consultations, researches, writing reports, and collecting all the evidence that you can expose the violations and injustice that you see to be able to convince people to accept that as it is. And then we get to the third part, which is the legal processes. And this legal process could be through domestic courts, could be through special tribunals, or could be through international accountability mechanisms, or some sort of informal structures which exist at the local level in each of the countries. But one thing that I would like to mention is that for ending violence and injustice, the prosecution of is not the only thing that you need to do. The prosecution of perpetrator is one part of that. But in order to end that, it's important for us to also understand the root causes of injustice that is shaping the injustice, and which is usually because of conflict, inequality, social issues, justice issues, political capture, and many other reasons that you have in every society. So we need to understand the root cause of that. And for that, we need to advocate, which requires an advocacy for system change. For example, you need to bring changes and reform the judiciary sector that will uphold the law. You need to reform the security sector that will protect the people. And on top of that, you also need to make sure that you build a kind of governance that is going to uphold the rule of law. So all of them are important. And then the process of reparations for the victims, the strengthening of the provision of compensation for them is important. Providing rehabilitation support is important for them. Ensuring restoration of their rights is important. And then most importantly, acknowledgement of their suffering is very much important. And then the space to be able to do all these things, the space for open and independent and vocal civil society, media, the human rights defenders, to be able to move this forward. The second part and the last part that I want to highlight is the role of women human rights defenders and in this whole process. Women human rights defenders are the main architects in the ecosystem of justice and accountability, because they are the first responders that they're raising their voice. They are documenting abuses. They are advocating for change. And then they are providing they're not only advocating for the accountability, they're also providing support, as mentioned, Tony, by yourself, through different initiatives of WPHF, providing support for the survivors. They need immediate support and safety. So all of them are coming, and it's HRDs that they're taking them forward.
Thank you very much for that. Absolutely. From calling it out to documenting, to supporting through the legal processes. But as you said, we wouldn't have CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We wouldn't have women's voting rights. We wouldn't have actually many of the anti-slavery movement without women human rights defenders standing up for that moment. Nimat, same question for you.
Echoing what my colleague has said, and especially being from Sudan and looking at the current situation in Sudan, I think we do believe without accountability and without justice, there will not be peace. And without women being in the seat or included in that justice process, there will not be justice. Because this war has targeted women in the first place. To me, justice, we should all move beyond defining justice as the narrowly crafted legal proceeding that can only be in the courtroom. Of course, it is indeed very important to have like criminal accountability, but the road is very long to reach there. And those of us who are working on the ground, working with people who are impacted day to day, it's very different. Without doing certain steps and mechanism we cannot reach. And that's why justice has remained a far-fetched reality from many who have been suffering and they have legitimate case to bring to justice. It starts with the start of the first bullet that hit wherever it is, because someone has to document that, has to keep the record of that. When this happens, women don't go to fight or flight. They go into what I can do to help those around me. And that's when it starts, documenting every single aspect of what happened, worse or bad or good. And then after which they decide on what to do, try to preserve the evidence, but they also try to keep people safe. And sometimes the environment is not enabling, but also they don't have access to what they need to do. So I believe justice starts by recognition of the harm that there is harm being done. I start with protection. If there's no protection, no matter, we've seen in Sudan, we documented, gathered information when they decided to torch the villages, the towns, the cities, the courts, those information has been gone forever. So there is a need for protection and provision of services as a form of justice, because these people deserve to have the right to be protected, to have the right to services, and to have the right to be included in the decision making, not just later in the accountability process, but also from the start with responding to their humanitarian emergency need. We've seen how many, what it means when a woman is impacted, when a woman becomes survivor, that devastate the entire family. So in order for them to seek justice, they need to be in a place where they are able to fight for the right to have that justice. And then after that, inclusion of women not as victims and witnesses, but as advocate and policy shaper of those justice mechanism, whether it is international court or national court or regional court, it is very, very important. And I very much echo what my colleague here said. Justice has to address the realities on the ground, the root causes that cause the injustices in the first place. For instance, we're looking at the verdict about Ali Kosheb, and I was like, if I was to be there, I would want them to guarantee that people have the right to return to their land of origin, because land means protection, means dignity, and then recognition of the dignity of the survivors. It is not that this is charity that's supposed to be done to them, but it is that they have the right and they have to exercise their dignity by being able to tell their story throughout the process and also in the court of justice. And this sometimes is not available, and it is very, very risky process to happen. But I think we need to go, and that's why the Darfur Women Action Group recently adopted a holistic justice approach that will define the steps that needs to be taken. It's built from the experience of women, from us, from others who have been working over the years, including like rehabilitation, people who end up losing part, or women who experience cases of fistula, reproductive health complication as the result of rape or sexual violence. They remain in terrible condition. And those are the areas that this is a form of justice that they need now, not later, so that they can be in position to fight for justice. So I will stop here. Will be more than happy to elaborate more.
Thank you so much, Diana.
In 2022, a woman human rights defender was killed in our country, was murdered. Murdered is the correct word. 3 years later, a verdict was had, murder it was. So when you're looking at justice, we have a court verdict here. That is justice on one hand. And for women human rights defenders who really rallied around this case and did solidarity visit every time the case came up for mention, were always there. This was a form of justice. But then we also come from communities where life lost cannot be replaced. So we have people who are, yes, justice has been served one way, but there's this loss. This person has not come back. So this is not justice according to them. So for me, when I think about justice, I'm looking at recognition. And I think recognition is a word we've had synonymously on this table. I'm looking at healing. I'm looking at restoration of dignity and ensuring such a harm does not happen. And when I'm thinking then in terms of accountability, once we've moved from justice and what this accountability means, it means we focus on recognizing the harm that has been caused. We take responsibility of this harm that has been caused. And then we also set up measures to ensure that such a harm is not repeated, is not replicated in any other scenario. And that's why she was talking about protection. So for me, it's all these steps that leads to the entirety of a woman defender being protected, being safe in the course of the work that they do.
Thank you so much. I think we could be here for days talking about the different steps and the protection and the social kind of norms change work that has to happen in order for the protection to really be substantive. But Nargis, one of the things that was not only jumped out at me from the Secretary General's report on access to justice this year was the fact that the justice needs and the justice mechanisms are not often intersecting. That we don't know if the law, what we do know, too often the law is not where the reality is or where the need is. And too often the actual justice institutions are not where the people are. How do you pursue accountability when violations are not yet formally recognized or being erased in some cases?
Thank you. Well, as I mentioned previously, when the law has not yet caught up with the reality, it is important that you lay the foundation for justice and for accountability. And as I mentioned, this is the most difficult part of the process because people are either in full denial or they just refuse to accept it. So you need to advocate for that, raise awareness, have debate to be able to convince people for that. But I believe the journey for accountability starts at the moment when people gather the courage to call a violation and injustice as it is, rather than refusing it. Once you start that, then I think that itself is giving the motivation to you and then pave the way for you how to move forward. And as I said, the move and path towards justice and accountability is not as straightforward. It's quite bumpy, up and down, like back and forward, but you keep on moving. Even if it's one step at a day, or even if it's one step at a month, but still you keep moving. So that is important that we keep moving. And I believe I would like to touch upon in the case of Afghanistan, my country, that I'm struggling. And I want to share my experience of 4 years with you, not myself, but actually there are several of my sisters in this room, as Palwa Shah Hassan, Asila Wardak, and Maria Kremi. They are also part of this journey, every one of us. As you know very well, in 2021, the Taliban took control of Afghanistan. And as soon as they took control of Afghanistan, within a few weeks, they started issuing edicts. But that was the part of a process of bombardment of the edicts on women and targeting each and every basic human rights of women, banning them from school, banning them from work, banning them from free movement, banning them from public spaces like gym, park, whatever they could think about. So that was the situation. And I remember when we were attending different meetings and conferences, and when we were describing the situation of women as a gender apartheid, there was full denial, not by the Taliban, but by UN agencies. I'm sorry to say this with due respect to everybody there, but that is part of the process. We are here to speak it and like honestly and genuinely with each other. International organizations, some of the even human rights defenders, saying that, oh, we are away from Afghanistan and we have lost the touch on the ground. We don't know what is happening on the ground. Some would say that, oh, the women inside Afghanistan do not agree with this term that you're using it. So these kind of very, I would call them soft denials and refusals that we face. But what I was very much impressed that the women of Afghanistan did not give up on these ones. We said that we have to continue our struggle to be able to find a way for that. So every time that the Taliban issued edicts, we kept on translating that. We had webinars, we had like open letters, we had conferences, we had events, and we kept on raising awareness and using that for exposing the institutionalized and systematic discrimination that was happening against women and girls inside Afghanistan. Eventually, by like arranging all of them meetings, and then like for every excuse that you're using, we're trying to come for solutions. For example, they say that we do not have touch with women inside Afghanistan, thanks to Zoom. I say Zoom has been so helpful for us in the past 4 years, thanks to Zoom, because they helped us to have meetings with women, not only in Kabul, but in 4 remote provinces of Afghanistan, hear from them. We managed to connect them to be able to speak at the side events that you're arranging in Security Council, in Human Rights Council, and different conferences. And we're telling people that just listen to these women and girls right from inside Afghanistan. We managed to document by having researches with them, like having videos from them. We talked to them. We provided mentorship for them and training for them, not only to young girls, but to senior human rights defenders and even young boys to understand what is gender apartheid. What is the International Court of Justice? What is the International Criminal Court? Or these different international accountability tools? And for them that to understand that how we can use them for bringing justice for girls and women inside Afghanistan, but also for young boys and other groups. So we raise their awareness. And you wouldn't believe it, in the 4 years, we just managed to work tirelessly to be able to convince everybody that to actually move from the phase of denial of gender apartheid to actually at least recognize that yes, there is the system of gender apartheid in Afghanistan. So I think that itself is a very like powerful example for all of us to look into. But I'm sure it's not only Afghanistan. Every country is having their own story that all of us can share and can learn from. And then right from there, we start our advocacy, and we'll continue to do that. And for us, this is the pathway forward. One other thing that I would like to mention about our advocacy is that it has been highly decentralized, highly diverse, and it's not being dominated by anybody. Our singers are singing about gender apartheid. Our poets are writing poems about gender apartheid. Our sportswomen are using their platforms. Even some of them actually after that they're being dismissed because they said you cannot use your platform for calling recognition of gender apartheid in Afghanistan. They said even I'm going to be removed from the race, I am going to make my advocacy. So they use their platform to call for codification of gender apartheid as a crime against humanity. So everybody used and like whatever platform, whatever tool they had at their own disposal for advocating for gender apartheid. And of course, what we also did that besides working amongst ourselves, we also work with a number of international organizations, agencies, and legal experts, including Kavya, one of our very strong allies who's sitting here, to be able to build the case, the legal case and evidence for recognition of gender apartheid in Afghanistan and its codification as a crime against humanity. I believe that fostering solidarity has been very helpful for us because whatever we have done so far, I don't call it achievement, but I call it at least a response to what is happening in Afghanistan. This would not have been possible without our allies and supporters. And these allies are human rights defenders around the globe, international organizations such as WPHF, MENALIS, and in an international working group of NGOs working group, and then many individuals like MPs, senators, politicians, that we knock their door, we go and we talk to them, and they literally personally stand with us, and we say that we have to make sure that this is moving ahead.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now ask Nima, you were talking about the importance of documenting. and women human rights defenders documenting what is happening, and then sometimes what happens to that documentation. How do we ensure that women's leadership in documenting sexual and gender-based violence in particular is recognized as central to justice and peace building?
Thank you, Tony. Again, I think this is a very important question, especially in our case. In most cases, we have documented heartbreaking stories of horror and cases of violation that you never imagined to live in this world to see. And that is a daily life of women. In the work of the April 2023, or when the international community, international NGOs, and everyone have left the Sudan, of course, because of insecurity and the brutal war that started, women were the first. We felt it was kind of at the end of the world for us, but because of the role that played by women, the first attack happened during the April 15th. We gathered the next day, created groups. With me here, Sister Salwa, she knows very well what I'm talking about. The first thing is bring everyone from every single city in Sudan. They say, oh, like there is no attack in that city. We said, no, it's going to go, because we know very well from experience that we built from the Darfur genocide in 2023. It is the women who were able to document all the reports, all the country reports that were produced, whether by state, by agencies, believe me or not. The first start and the foundation of that documentation is done by women on the ground. As I said, women have been living in camp for more than 25 years, and now they are living again, which is very sad. I can't even begin to imagine. And we ask ourselves every day, how could people be this resilient? But while they're staying there, it's not they are there to cry and ask for help, but they also take responsibility, document, try to aid their communities. And that is why we see even possible that whether the UN agencies or international institutions that are doing documentation, including the media, you cannot imagine the burden on women, human rights defender and women civil society leader, grassroots leader in camps, in villages. We are the one who identify credible sources. We are the one who collect evidence. We are the one who connect, translate, speak, and try to protect our people at the same time. Because you can't just throw a name to a journalist. You want to get the word out, but you also wanted to get it out safely. And we also do documentation with intention of pursuing accountability. Unfortunately, most of this work is not supported and it's not funded. And it's very hard, but because we know it is important, if we don't do it, then there is no accountability. And preserving it, it is a biggest issue. For instance, when the war started, we moved our teams from Al-Fashir, from Kabkabia, from Zalinji, from Niala into Jabal Marra. It is a hard-to-reach areas to keep the safe space that we created for women survivors of gender-based violence to come to receive treatment. There is no transportation, imagine, in Darfur. People have to rent donkeys, camels, and sometimes walk to bring a survivor. You also have to support them, give them fund, a one-time monitoring, a value that will bring the survivor to the center. Sometimes it takes days. And then they need medical treatment so that you prepare them to feel better, to sit down and talk and document. So in that process, your staff, yourself, it is so traumatizing. The only reason you keep on doing is that you are dreaming and you are hoping that one day perpetrators will be behind bars. And that is the motivation that keeps us go and stand up every day. But to tell you the truth, I would challenge people in this room to point me out to one agency that gives funding to accountability. In the case, we work so hard in the case of Darfur, we get the referral, we advocated for perpetrators to be brought to justice. Until today, We look around and we can't see any foundation, any agencies that provide funding for women human rights defender or NGOs or national NGOs that are doing documentation or advocating for accountability. And guess what? Because it is very risky, very few organizations. I can tell 2 or 3 organizations, Sudanese-led organizations that work in accountability, because it means you are thrown out of your country, you leave your family, you risk your life, you may be getting killed. I was thrown out of my country 26 years ago, 21 years ago. It was in 2005 when I had to leave, but I continue to do what I do because I believe it's important. But it's not everybody has the leverage I had. I came from a supportive family who respect and protect women. But many women like myself who do the work, but they cannot live without mahram or a male member that can protect them from in a Muslim society, which is also deterrent for women. Sometimes you can't have that opportunity to flee when you are at risk because you need to live with someone, or you don't have a permission to live alone because you are a single woman, you are not married, you don't have your brother traveling with you. And these are the things that nobody can know without talking to people. So I think understanding the toll that women human rights defenders are taking, it is very important, and supporting them is another thing that we all have to advocate for it, because if there is no support, the member state supporting the court and having those mechanisms, but also supporting the people who do the work, because we are the bridge builders between the fact-finding missions, the International Commission of Inquiries, the media, the panel of experts. We are the medium. We are the one who are doing, and we are doing this work for free. We are gladly doing it because it's important. But someone has to support that work if it is to be sustainable. If NIMAD is doing it, I don't expect anybody else to be NIMAD because it's not a good example. Who want to leave their country? Who want to be running around all the time do this? I do it because it's a choice I made. I enjoy doing it, but no, I can't expect anybody, even my sisters, I can't expect them to support or do what I do. So there has to be support so that being human rights defender attractive for people to continue to do and pursue this. We need to have allies among member states, among UN agencies, among advocates like Kavia sitting next to us, thank you. They're always making sure that we come to the state and speak. UN Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, thank you to Flexibility that we give you a lot of feedback sometimes, like you need to fund this and support this, but we also want to say that if you can reduce the bureaucracy, we can do more with little. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer additional questions.
Thank you so much, Nimat. I think what's also really important of each of the women human rights defenders that are speaking with us today is that they continue to keep not only member states accountable, but the United Nations accountable, and each and every one of us, so that we can be better in delivering on what I still think is a beautiful charter. Diana, we've been talking about people being resilient, but we haven't really crossed into what that means for the environment and what justice looks like in the environmental context. You spoke earlier of the gap that's left when a human being is lost. What damage is done that's long-term and often irreversible? When that's done to the environment, what does accountability look like? And what kinds of tools or mechanisms have been most effective, in your opinion, in securing recognition, compensation, and restoration for the communities dependent on the environment?
Thank you for that. As a Kenyan, and a lot of Kenyans, land for us is not just an economic factor. It's not something that brings you income. It's a source of livelihood. It is connection. I am because of the land. So my story emanates from the land that I come from. I come from a pastoralist community. And if it means our cattle do not have feed, do not have access to land, then it means a whole generation has been cut. So when you're looking at the harm that goes into the land, it is not just the land in itself, but even the people within that land, because it then means that entire systems of life have been destroyed. And over time, one of the things that is normally not taken into context is the gendered way that this has been affected. When you're looking at evictions that have happened, and I want to cite one example, we have one indigenous community in our country called the Ogek. And the Ogek community has been struggling with forced evictions out of the forest. They're forest dwellers. And these forced evictions have let an entire community not know the history of where they come from. A whole generation of people saying that my grandfather used to tell me that this is where we come from, but now I don't know because we were evicted and we've been trying to go back to the forest and we are not yet able to go to the forest. And the African Court on Human and People's Rights delivered a ruling and affirmed the right of the Ogek community to live within this forested area. But that has never been implemented. We still have all this back and forth with the government, and a ruling years later has never been implemented. But for us to know the story of such communities or the stories of this connection with the land, there's a huge role that women environmental defenders play. And women environmental defenders here, I don't mean in the context of a woman defender, but even a mother, a grandmother from that village, the role they play, the documentation that she's talking about. It is these women who have traversed across areas where there are no vehicles, where the climatic conditions are very harsh, to document the stories and say, we used to keep these herbs that are healing. We used to keep these herbs that are feeding generations. We used to do this. We used to do that. But because of this gap in where we are, then we are losing not just our livelihood, but we are also losing generational knowledge of how to exist within such communities. So you find someone telling you, oh, you can eat those leaves. And someone would ask you, leaves, what do you mean I would eat leaves? But there's a knowledge that, an indigenous knowledge that knows that indeed these leaves heal, or these leaves have a benefit that we don't know about. So the issue of monitoring and documentation has been a driving force. And in terms of tools that we use, then the monitoring has been a factor. Right now, the Kenyan space is heavily political. So you get to lose a lot of focus for other things that are happening because the focus is political. But then when we get to the political conversation, land has always been at the core of political conversations. So we are talking elections, yes, but if you look at the driving force behind elections, what is it? It is land issues. We are talking about elections or politics. What is it at the core of it? It is women being violated. And right now we are really struggling with technologically facilitated GBV. And in this case, it is online violence that becomes offline, and offline violence that comes online. And one of the critical tools that we have, and we are partnering with UNDP in this, is the eMonitor Plus platform. And the eMonitor Plus platform, when it came about, we were looking at data that was missing. We're looking at women environmental defenders, but because we're always in our villages where we know online space is limited to a few, and is limited to a few because we normally don't talk about it, but you'd see Nairobi as the urban place, and there's a lot of, I think everyone knows about Kenyans online, and you would assume that it is all Kenyans who are online, but there's quite a huge margin and a group of people who are not online. So we start and ask the question, is it that we don't have violations happening at the women environmental defenders, or we don't have data? And we found that it's data that is missing. And then this eMonitor Plus then helped us start mapping out the violations that are happening. And we are able to see there's quite a lot of stigmatization, of segregation, of some very subtle forms of violence that are happening at the community level that we really don't talk about. So tools of documenting really helps us not just get the data, but even in terms of protection mechanisms or even advocacy mechanisms, what do we start putting in place? Because now we have the data. We live in a place where if you cite a case, someone asks you, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? It doesn't happen. And so people usually give jokes and say proof or it didn't happen. but violations are happening. I cited an example of a woman environmental defender who was murdered. So these things are happening, but because of the lack of documentation, and it's documentation, but then also following up the cases, that we end up losing this, that becomes our margin for us. We end up losing that connection and seeing that there's a significant group of people that we are leaving behind. And why should we leave them behind? And why and how can we now carry them onto this conversation? So we have moved from it being a conversation of the elite, a conversation of the political class, but a conversation of livelihoods, because then it has connection. It has connection by, if I'm drinking dirty water, if my child has gone to school and come back sick, then there's that connection. And the women environmental defenders have really helped us bring this connection to life, because now it has ceased to be about businesses. Right now, there's a lot of conversation around climate conversation, around carbon credits, for example, around how you can make business with your land, again, disenfranchising other communities. But then we are saying, then what is the human connection with this land? What is the human connection with this missing data? Are we benefiting economically, but leaving a group of people behind who are marginalized, who are dying of hunger, who are not able to access their source of livelihoods, their own history even? Are we losing our people in that regard? And for us, that has really been helpful. And the most fortunate thing is that the women environmental defenders are at the core of leading this conversation. It is saying that we are no longer taking care of our families, we are taking care of the environment. When we are being evicted from the forests, it is my story to tell. I am a mother, I am living with my child. We normally do those houses where you put sticks together, those temporary shelters. It is the women who do this. So if you're being evicted, where else am I going to get this specific tree that helps me put down a structure? Where else are my children going to feed on these things that they have been, but now they're not existing? So for me, that telling the story from the woman's perspective, that has been missing. And then the tools for data collection have really been helpful.
Thank you so much. That's absolutely true. And when I think about telling the story for the women's perspective, especially around justice, I was again reading on the way here, and Giselle Pellicot has done something amazing about the woman's perspective. She's flipped shame. Who should feel shame? Right? Because the woman's perspective is critical in telling the stories of the land. It's also critical in telling the stories to gain justice and shift social norms about where accountability actually lies. Now, Kavya, let's talk about where accountability actually lies. I have the easiest question for you. You are working closely with women leaders to bring their voices to the UN Security Council. Why does engagement, and I think many people are wondering right now, why does the engagement with the Security Council matter for advancing justice? And what responsibilities do member states carry to ensure testimonies and evidence translate into meaningful action?
Thank you. Very easy question. Thank you so much, Tony. I hope you all had a lot of inspiration from our incredible women human rights defenders on this panel, because you're going to get a little less inspiration from me as an ING on, because my question pertains to the UN Security Council. Why does engagement with the UN Security Council matter? So my organization, the NGO Working Group on Women, Peace and Security, in addition to advocating for women's rights at the Security Council, we also support women, civil society and human rights defenders, briefing policymakers directly, because we believe that international and multilateral decisions on peace and security need to be informed by the perspectives of these incredible women. And as Tony insinuated, this matters more than ever right now, when the Security Council, despite being the international primary body on peace and security, is facing major geopolitical challenges in fulfilling this role. The Council, as you know, has been unable to prevent or even address the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's been unable to prevent Israel's genocide in Gaza, not least due to 6 US vetoes. Not only are permanent members of the Security Council violating the UN Charter, but they're constraining this body from actually doing its work. And what we are also seeing is that member states who should be standing up to defend the UN Charter, including when the US military operation in Venezuela, or if we talk about what's happening in Iran right now, they are reluctant to stand up and defend the UN Charter because they are worried about their own economic, political, and security interests. So I think we're at a point where the work of women human rights defenders is all the more important. But I want to give you a couple more examples of the Security Council to make this case. We have Nimat here from Sudan, and the Council has been unable to prevent or even address the genocide that's taking place in Sudan, including failing to address the violation of its own arms embargo. And of course, we also had a Russian veto of the last Security Council resolution in Sudan. We have representatives from Afghanistan in this room. Despite the Security Council having met on Afghanistan more than 30 times since the Taliban takeover, despite 9 resolutions and 20 press statements, the Security Council has been unable to get the Taliban to reverse a single restriction on women's rights. And on the contrary, as my colleagues from Afghanistan here well know, the Taliban have actually imposed additional restrictions despite what the Council has called on them to do, including the criminal procedure regulation of the courts, which is the latest that they've done, which legitimizes gender-based violence. It recognizes slavery. It prescribes the death penalty for a wide range of defenses. It criminalizes dissent. Now, it might sound like I'm rattling off a litany of reasons of why the Security Council has failed. But these are, in fact, reasons why I think why civil society and why human rights defenders need to be paying all the more attention to what the Security Council is doing to bring accountability to what the Council itself does. And their independent perspectives, I think, are now more important than ever. My organization supports women civil society briefing the Security Council, as I said at the start. And every time we support a women civil society representative briefing the Council, her unfiltered perspective and her participation is holding the Council accountable to its own resolutions, to international law, to the UN Charter. Nimat here, I should say, who we supported briefing the Security Council several years ago, warned of the genocide in El Fasher in April 2024. That's 2 whole years before the fact-finding mission came to that same conclusion. And my Afghan colleagues here might remember when Zarqa Yaftali briefed the Security Council back in 2020, a full year before the Taliban took over Afghanistan, where she urged the international community not to trade away women's rights for peace. My organization has supported the only Burmese women ever to brief the Security Council. And last year, again, we supported the only Sudanese woman to brief the Council, despite the Council meeting many times on Sudan. So I think this sort of engagement is especially important now. It's always important, but it's especially important now given the pushback on gender and on women's rights that we're seeing at the Security Council as well. We're seeing it geopolitically. We're also seeing it at the Council, where we are seeing pushback against terms that we thought we had settled 25 years ago with Resolution 1325, pushback on gender-based violence, on women's participation, on quotas, on respect for international law, even on mentions of civil society. We're seeing pushback at the Council right now. And this combined with the fact that the Trump administration has now imposed visa restrictions and travel bans on a number of nationals from many of the conflicts that are on the Security Council's agenda, including Afghanistan, including Palestine, Myanmar, Haiti, Yemen. This means that we are likely to hear less and less from these very important social movements and women human rights defenders who should be informing Security Council decision making. So I'll just stop there, but to say that, I think civil society is the mechanism for accountability and it's so important that their voices are actually influencing what multilateral institutions are doing.
You made the question look very easy, Kavya. I'm now going to welcome and introduce Palwasha Hassan, who is the Executive Director of MENA's List and the INGO partner one of the INGO partners for our Women Human Rights Defender Windows, to lead the question and answer section so that you get to ask your questions directly to these incredible women.
Thank you, Tony. kind of difficult job now because I only have 5 minutes to go, but I still would like to thank you for your kind intro and for the partnership of Women, Peace, Humanitarian Fund with Minas Less for the work that we all are doing in support of human rights defenders, women human rights defenders in Afghanistan and countries in region in a very difficult juncture of history where very little support or no support or safety net and protection is there for WHRDs. I will jump to the Q&A. But a few ground rules. We can only accept 2 to 3 questions maybe. So I request you to please raise your hand if you have questions to our respected panelists. And that will help me to keep the orders who to ask first. And also please introduce your name, just keep it limited to that and your organization. And if possible, state your questions in maybe 1 and 2 sentences. And please let us know that this question is directed to which one of our respected panelists. So with that, I open the floor for Q&A. Yes, please. And you're first. Who? Okay, second. So maybe.
Hi, my name is Emily Gordetsky. I'm a youth delegate from San Francisco, California. And my question is, what should youth do to contribute to the fight for human rights worldwide? And generally, what advice do you have for the next generation of human rights defenders?
We will also take the second question.
Hi, my name is Lata Gulapalli. I run projects for women to make them financially independent. The question is, I understand it is extremely difficult in countries where rights are on the genocide level, but do you have a view on what kind of normalization has happened to these kind of rights in countries which are peaceful, so to speak, or which are developing or progressing in some way? Thank you.
Thank you. So we will take the last and the third question. Yes, sir. At the back.
Yes, thank you. I'm Mr. Onesmo Lenguruma from Tanzania Human Rights Defenders Coalition. Yeah, we face a serious challenges, especially when it comes to protection services to women human rights defenders because of their role within the family and the community. If you want to evacuate outside the country or other challenges, there are so many challenges. I just want to ask those who are working with the women and peace, especially our colleagues, the main challenge we are confronting is there's no resources in supporting protection mechanism for women defenders because of the burden they have, the families and the kids and other things. Do you have that sort of framework that you provide emergency support to women human rights defenders who face challenges?
Thank you. So I will ask each of the panelists to take less than 90 seconds. I don't know. For responding to this question. Those were directed to you or maybe collectively respond on the questions. So I start with you, madam.
I'll take 2. The first on youth. At the Hub, we have a program called Femtorship, and Femtorship is mentorship, but from a feminist perspective. And at the core of this is nurturing the young and upcoming human rights defenders. And one of the greatest way we've done this is through intergenerational conversations. Do we learn from the ones who have been, and then chat our way within this space, but also not saying we are learning from them because there's this notion, but also what are we sharing? Because with the way things change, there are certain ways things are also changing that perhaps the young people are better equipped at handling than the older generation. generation. So for us, then the intergenerational conversations ensures a space of learning, of sharing, and of growth. So that's one way that we are doing it. The question on Onesmo in terms of resources, I think one of the things that we have done, yes, resources are tight, but is invest in community protection. And community protection is all of us on this table coming together and saying we are supporting one woman human rights defender. We've heard of a case, you could come stay in my house. Of course, there's a lot of perhaps even mental at all that it takes, but then it's in the spirit of leaving no one behind. We just invest in community. I think for us, especially within the African setup, we do a lot of things together. So you'd find that I'm hosting someone from Tanzania in my home. Tomorrow I'm in Uganda doing one thing, 1, 2, 3. So for us, investing in community mechanisms and just encouraging such support systems has really come in handy where resources are not available.
Thank you. Nargis, I will give the floor to.
Thank you. First of all, to respond to the youth generation representative here, I think, well, you are blessed with a lot of advancements and opportunities that we were not, especially in terms of connectivity and technology. So my advice to you is that you make use of that for staying connected with those countries that they are at war, with those women that they're suffering in other countries, and use every platform and every opportunity that you have to raise your voice and be part of that positive change. Because one thing that I believe human rights defenders are doing is keeping hope alive until we get to justice and accountability. So please take part in that and make sure that you're doing that stronger than us and build upon what we have started. And with regard to support for human rights defenders, unfortunately, it's not only about funding. I think in many ways, there are no political supports for human rights defenders. And there's not empathy sometimes for human rights defenders. Because human rights defenders are not only attacked by the, like those that they are in power or in or the perpetrator of impunity. They are sometimes under attack by very educated men, women, many people that they don't like outspoken, vocal women. That sometimes you have even well-educated women being part of that, and they will never come forward and dare and say that, oh, I don't like that woman because she's very outspoken. She will come and assassinate her character, her moral. They will attack her family, her background, and any kind of allegation that they could think of, they will use it. So understanding that context and the kind of traumatizing situation that human HRDs are going, I think is really important. And in many times, time has come that, the political support, empathy, and understanding has been more important for us than the financial resources, because that is helping one part of the problem. But to be able to continue this very bumpy, very challenging journey, and as I say, keeping the hope alive to motivate others to be part of that, it's important that we have that package of understanding and support for each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your question and thank you for being here. I'll take your question and then the brother there's question. For young people and for people to promote human rights across the world, I think I start by recognizing the right of the person next to you everywhere. If we can do that and spread this message, it will mean it and do it. So it's not just word slogan, but also action. I really feel very optimistic and get a lot of energy from working with young people, including one from my team sitting next here. I always do public speaking and collaborate with universities. We do a lot of work with students, and they are the most incredible. So I say, you know what, I feel like really they give me power because these are the future leaders that when we speak to them, they understand what we say because they learn about these issues at early age. And I think we all have to invest in empowering youth. We do have youth empowerment centers, and we started seriously integrating in our work, not only working with women and other civil society, but also targeting youth to work with them and empower them. If we can empower them with knowledge, they will definitely be our leaders and champions in changing the world. In terms of the human rights defenders, I think this has started recently. There is effort of supporting women human rights defenders, but the support is not really enough. In most cases, like a person has to be able to fill a form. They have to be like when you are running, like what form you fill, and then you have to be also connected to other people who know you, can provide references. Like in the situation in Sudan, everything has changed. Even people like we couldn't connect with our relatives, and forget about fellow colleagues or friends from international NGOs who were there, who knows people who can recommend them. Sometimes people can't even have reference. And we know like I feel heartbroken. We have a case of like a lawyer who has been working for years. She couldn't get protection because for whatever reason, she's being in that category, while we have 4 lawyers being killed by the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan from the Darfur Bar Association. So think in that. And then in most cases, some people, they give up having that protection because if they can't take their families with them, they cannot do. So groups like Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, they do. But other many institutions, you go online and fill the form, never hear from them. So this is a lot. And who to call? People call a few of us like Nimat, Salwa, who are sitting overseas, assuming that we can figure it out. So the gap is huge. That is what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
It is kind of demonizing of human rights defender. I went to Uganda, and many of my colleagues, these are the people who will break everything to go and get you that information and do everything. They were relocated and only for 6 months, and the support ended there. So imagine someone uprooted from there. The risk remained there, but people know it's like you can only get protection within the first 3 months of the attack. It was like the war has been going on, genocide for as long as I've been alive in Sudan, and then the recent war. So these are the issues that you need to understand. Protection, have to understand the context of each single human rights defender in each situation. So without understanding the context, we cannot do adequate protection. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Kavya, would you like to have like 1 minute to reflect on the question or overall your last
I'll
thought
be really,
to share?
really quick, very quick, because I think my colleagues and co-panelists have said everything that needs to be said. Just on women human rights defenders, I cannot emphasize and underline what Nimat has said. They need funding, they need political support, and for funds like WPHF as well as other protection funds, they need you to minimize bureaucratic and administrative impediments, because when they need something urgently, that's the last thing that women human rights defenders need. Another just very quick point on protection of women human rights defenders. I think we need to be really careful while addressing the very real protection needs that women human rights defenders face, not to compromise their participation. I think that's really important, especially in the current anti-gender far-right framing of protecting women, which is basically misused to exclude women from public spaces and from political platforms. So I think we need to be just really careful not to exclude women. And lastly, on the youth delegates question, we are not going to, unfortunately, solve gender inequality or climate change or capitalism or many of the issues that you are now about to inherit. So we really need you to continue the fight. Good luck.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful questions. And I apologize again because of the very short time that we had for not able to get more questions here. But I would really encourage you to stay connected with these human rights defenders from Afghanistan, Kenya, Sudan, but also many others who couldn't make it to today's event. And they all deserve to be connected, supported. And overall, what Nargis and also Tony mentioned about there is denial and non-recognition of violation. So we all have to put our hand in solidarity to work together. But it also reminds us that with closing of this panel in UN Hall, we are reminded that peace and access to justice is a struggle. And as you said, Nargis, it is also a journey that we need to live that in our communities, our tradition, and our shared values. Values such as Adala. You know, we are talking about countries like Afghanistan where Sharia is claimed to be enforced there. But Adala and Tawheed is a parallel foundation of Islamic belief, which has been ignored in case of women being denied their basic and fundamental human rights. So in pursuit of justice and to continue tradition that recognizes lived realities and guide us towards just and lasting peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And sorry we're rushing. We had such incredible answers. I didn't want to cut them short. I do want to say there was another question that we did not address yet. And that is the question about what works, basically, what has been working. And colleagues, I think we can agree that when countries, we can look at Colombia as one of the better practices for protecting women human rights defenders, countries like the countries who have partnered with us where civic space and women human rights defenders in particular are protected and genuinely feel protected by the state and the community, where there's an understanding amongst the community that what they're doing is critical. We unfortunately have a lot of legislation called femicide legislation. I say unfortunately only because we wait until the person has died to start the process, but it does actually lead eventually to a more robust justice system and protection. And to the question about the financing, we do have this wonderful women human rights defender window, and this window has supported over 1,200 women. And Nimat, you'll be happy to know that since 2023, everybody who applies to this window has a response from us, whether it is a positive or negative response. We unfortunately cannot support everybody who applies. That is just part of the challenge of financing. But in all of the challenges, there are silver linings. There's the government of Norway, there's the government of France, there's the government of Belgium. And I'm taking this opportunity to introduce His Excellency, the Ambassador Bart de Wolf, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Belgium, so that he can share his remarks and reflections. Because without these kinds of member states, this work would not be possible.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Distinguished colleagues, dear partners, as we conclude today's discussion, allow me to express Belgium's sincere appreciation to our co-hosts and to all participants for such, I think, a rich discussion. We meet at a time when the women, peace and security agenda is indeed under serious strain. It has been mentioned. The Secretary General's 2025 report highlights a worrying regression in women's rights and protection. An 87% increase in conflict-related sexual violence that was recorded over the last 2 years is a stark reminder of the brutality that persists, alongside growing attacks on women human rights defenders. But yet, luckily, the SG report also shows that progress is still possible, and that the investigation and prosecution of crimes against women and girls have made remarkable progresses. Survivor-led activism, women's organizations, and the work of national and international courts have all strengthened pathways to justice. Today's conversation offered, I think, an important reminder. Justice is a continuum, not a single ruling or a moment. It begins with local documentation, which has been recalled multiple occasions. It continues through advocacy and engagement with international mechanisms, culminates in accountability, and ultimately addresses root causes and results, hopefully, in policy change. Women human rights defenders sustain every part of this continuum, often at immense personal risk. For Belgium, this is central to our foreign policy and to our long-standing engagement on WPS. During our term on the Security Council back in 2019, sounds like light years ago, and through our current fourth National Action Plan on WPS, we have prioritized the participation and the protection of human rights peace builders in Security Council discussions, including from Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and the DRC. The importance of such engagements was rightly so recalled here today. Our commitments are matched by concrete support through the Women's Peace and the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Funds, Belgium is proud to stand with women's organizations in countries such as Afghanistan, Ukraine, Moldova, Mali, and the DRC. These organizations are essential for sustaining justice efforts, protecting communities, and preventing future violations. Above all, we honor the courage of women defenders, such as the ones we heard from today, but also the many others whose work keeps the justice pathway alive. Belgium will remain steadfast in championing your voices, protecting your space, and ensuring that national commitments on WPS are implemented, funded, and monitored. Upholding accountability and protecting human rights defenders are not optional. They are essential to building sustainable peace, I think.
Thank you so much. And this is what we need from member states, for the General Assembly, for the Security Council. I want to thank all of you. You've bared with me as I managed the jet lag and the exhaustion from a flight today. But we've heard from lovers of people, we've heard from aunts, we have heard from troublemakers about good trouble. And I think what some of the young women in the room and young men, it's really great to see everyone in the room, is that we need to continue talking with each other. We need to continue listening to one another and learning more from each other about what's happening in the world. Because unfortunately, this is not the first time that this has happened in the world. And unless we listen and learn, it will not be the last. And we hear this a lot from our colleagues at OHCHR. UN Human Rights, the mechanisms that hold us to account. And we're very excited to have Mr. Riohada, the Chief of the Equality, Development and Rule of Law section at the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, to give us the closing remarks to this session. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Hada.
Thank you very much. This year, on International Women's Day, our High Commissioner for Human Rights underscored that access to justice for all women and girls is a cornerstone of gender equality. And he warned of a resurgent patriarchy driving systems of impunity and exclusion. The cost of that resurgence is tragically visible. Just last week, Iraqi feminist activist Yana Mohammed was killed in Baghdad. She spent her life defending victims and survivors of violence and trafficking. Her killing and the killings of so many women human rights defenders worldwide must be investigated and those responsible held to account. This is why our event today comes at a moment of profound urgency. And I want to express our deep appreciation to Nargis, Nimet, Diana, and Karvia for their powerful interventions today. Your voices illuminate not only the courage required to defend human rights in hostile environments, but also the critical expertise that you, women human rights defenders, contribute despite shrinking civic space, intimidation, and legal repression. And I'd like to thank the organizers and hosts of this event, the Women's Peace and Human Rights Fund, the governments of Belgium and Norway, and our UN and civil society partners. It's been a privilege for OHR to co-sponsor not just this event, but our continuous efforts. Together, we are reaffirming that justice and accountability are never single moments, but they emerge from a long continuum of efforts driven above all by women human rights defenders, documenting violations, supporting survivors, advocating for recognition of crimes, influencing national and international mechanisms, and securing gender-responsive remedies. And today's panel reminded us of the breadth of this work, despite the escalating risks with women human rights defenders disproportionately targeted online and offline. especially in conflict settings. And this is why investments such as the WPHF Women Human Rights Defenders window are indispensable. They provide not just resources, but protection and recognition. These are lifelines for activists working in context of heightened risks. OSHR has supported the window since its establishment as part of our office-wide priority to expand civic space and defend women human rights defenders. We also welcome the UN system-wide commitment endorsed last year to strengthen protection of women human rights defenders in conflict-affected countries. This is a vital step towards coordinated monitoring, advocacy, response, and resourcing across the UN system. OSHR, together with UN Women and other UN agencies, is working to operationalize this commitment. As we started our discussion, on the other side of the First Avenue, member states adopted the CSW agreed conclusion by vote. This is a challenging time for UN, but when I heard the cheers, I definitely felt the strength and the resilience of women rights, human rights defenders, and those member states who support them. So let us honor not only the defenders here today, but those who could not be here, those denied travel, those who continue their work quietly and at great personal risks. OHHR and the UN system stand firmly with all women human rights defenders and with your struggle for justice, dignity, and rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your remarks, and thank you all for joining us this evening. I told you I was in Ukraine recently, and I learned a little bit more about Ukrainian poetry. And I invite you to learn a bit more about Lesia Ukrainia and the poets from Iraq, from Afghanistan, the women who will not be silenced and who continue to speak truth to power and remind us that we must find joy still in this fight. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you soon. I almost did it. I was like, I was tempted to do it on my own.